Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you just a couple of nuggets of interest tonight to get your teeth into. And that's because I've already released quite a lot of content today and so on and so forth. But just a few things that I thought were worth having a little chat about. So the first thing is ATACMS. Okay, so Ukraine is getting Abrams, said Jack Detch in Foreign Policy recently, but not what it really wants. And what it really wants is long-distance munitions like ATACMS. These missiles that can, reach into all parts of occupied Ukraine and go further if that was allowed. That would be really significant. Everyone knows this. Then there were rumours today in the USA, all specialised departments approved the supply of ATACMS missiles to Ukraine, says Foreign Policy. If it doesn't happen, it's because President Joe Biden himself said so. This was written yesterday, mind. More than 18 months since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration has, after much deliberation, broken almost every apparent taboo that could trigger Kremlin escalation. First came artillery, then multiple rocket launch systems, and now the fanciest tanks that the US has to offer. Just don't ask the Biden administration when it plans to approve sending really long-range weapons to Ukraine. The imminent US decision about whether to finally dispatch the long-range US Army tactical missile system, which Kiev has been asking for over a year, including this week ahead of Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to the White House, is one of the big remaining question marks. The United Kingdom and France have sent long-range weapons, considered potentially problematic since they can strike beyond the battlefront and into Russia proper, with deployments of the Storm Shadow and Scout missiles. But US are still mum. US officials are still mum. I won't endeavour to evaluate Ukraine's request. If they requested it, they believe that they need it, US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin said at the end of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group meeting at Ramstein Air Base on Tuesday, before pivoting to what the US has termed Ukraine's most urgent military needs. I reported that, saying they needed air defence. As it says here, that tally includes air defences, artillery and mechanised units, but not, at least explicitly, the long-range missile system. Other US officials are equally tight-lipped. I was saying, it's not either or, it should be both and. The congressional aide who spoke to Foreign Policy on the condition of anonymity said that all US agencies had agreed to send the US Army tactical system. If it doesn't happen, it's because President Joe Biden himself said so, the person said. So, okay, I was saying, well, I would expect this to be announced. The announcement has just come out that the US will announce a $325 million aid package tomorrow, more officially, which will include M864 155mm cluster shells, other weapons like Avenger air defense systems, so those are basically man-pads on the back of a Humvee, TOW and 84 anti-tank weapons, HIMARS ammo and javelins, but no ATACMS. Right, this is, and this is Reuters, this is a real challenge. Not a big fan of this potential announcement, because really they need ATACMS. Of course they need ATACMS, and it's a real shame that these just aren't being included. It's still being finalized and it could change, said the official, but yeah, just really frustrating lack of ATACMS given in these details. It doesn't actually say that they're not included, I think, in this Reuters, but it gives a list of what is included, and ATACMS aren't there. Oh yeah, here it says, other new weapons for Ukraine were expected to be announced around this time of Biden's meeting with Zelensky, but not ATACMS missiles, which have been under discussion, US officials said. So yeah, it appears that they're not there, which is real annoyance. Not happy with that. Let's hope that it does, finally get on there, is finally pledged to Ukraine, because I think they would be, I don't know if it'd be a game changer, but it would be an addition to what I think is already a game changer, which is Storm Shadows and Scalp. Anyway, so I thought I'd share that with you. Now, the second thing I want to share with you concerns Brazil's Lula. So I said that he's going to go home early. I'm not sure that's happening now. And I think he is meeting with Zelensky after Biden meets with Zelensky. This is what Reuters has said earlier. And I'm going to do a bit of a volte face from what I said this morning. So I slagged off Lula a little bit. I've always been and I'm going to put my biases out here on the table. Like, I hated Bolsonaro, who was an autocratic leader in charge of Brazil. And Lula, I've seen some documentaries on Lula, and I quite like him. Relatively speaking, I think he's got good environmental principles. He's got workers' rights at the centre of what he wants to do, so on and so forth. So some of these things that appeal to me politically. However, he is compromised by Brazil being in BRICS and potentially having sympathies for Putin. But he's given out contradictory messages on Putin. And so this morning, the idea that he was going to leave early and not meet with Zelensky really peed me off, right? I was not happy with him. Anyway, today, some really interesting stuff is coming out. So first of all, he will be meeting with Zelensky, it looks like. And then this came up in Ukraine, the latest podcast. Listen to this. I mean, it's quite interesting what Francis Durney says in general about the UN Assembly, how it's such a big building that it's very difficult for anyone to command that building. He said only Zelensky did that, and Lula, which is Lula da Silva, sorry, which is, I think, really interesting.
Alluded to yesterday at the UN, the individual is really dwarfed by the scale of the modernist buildings that make up the vast complex. Even in the main hall, presidents and prime ministers are turned into miniatures. And it was a fellow journalist, shout out to Alex, who's a loyal listener to the podcast, who actually pointed out Olaf Scholz, who was swarmed by officials. Nobody is obviously who they are in this chamber, and that was one of the most striking features about it. Not even Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, could command the room when he made the opening remarks. Delegates continued to mutter to each other throughout his speech. And as I say, it's only by actually being there that one realizes how the space has a life far beyond the speaker on the main stage. It's rather like how the actors at Shakespeare's Globe had to compete with the chattering and clattering of its audience. There were few good speakers to match a room that seemed built for orators. And I couldn't help but wonder, all the world's a stage, but where are the big players? President Biden didn't really ignite the room. It was only the president of Brazil in the first couple of hours who managed to trigger some emotion from the chamber, receiving loud applause for his attack on the legitimacy of the UN Security Council following the actions of some of its permanent members. And indeed, that was one of the key themes that emerged listening to the speeches.
Okay, so that's really interesting, right? This is really significant in my book, right? This is really significant. Do not underestimate this. Now, I hope I'm not over egging this because of my biases, right? That he's somewhat more politically aligned, so I might jump onto him doing something that I agree with. Like, I was annoyed with him this morning. But this is actually far more significant than my, political predilections, okay? Because this is a member of BRICS saying something huge, okay? And this is what he said. So this is just from Merco Press, South Atlantic News Agency, whatever. You can see it. There's a number of places. Lula warns multilateralism is being eroded. Now, this is absolutely right. So we're moving towards, instead of a kind of multilateralism across the world, we're moving towards these kind of pockets of hegemony where you've got BRICS, for example, of which he's a member and Brazil's a member, seeking some kind of move away from multilateralism or their own kind of multilateralism among select few, and then you've got US hegemony on the other side, and so on and so forth, rather than everyone working together cooperatively. But check this out, because this is bang on, right? And one of the huge complaints, and Zelensky made this point himself in his own speech to the UN Security Council this afternoon, and the idea is that the Security Council is kind of impotent and pointless because you've got Russia sitting as a permanent member of the Security Council. So the US, I think, are keen for talks to happen about expanding the Security Council. Now, I don't know what effect that would have on when someone on a permanent seat makes terrible decisions. Nonetheless, this was once a bit of a taboo subject is now actually is open season on this subject, and people are okay to talk about this in public now, or in the correct places, and there are breakout rooms where I think this is being discussed. So this is one of the most important outcomes of what is going on right now in the UN. Right, so quote, this is Lula, say, we will remain critical of any attempt to divide the world into zones of influence, which you could say is somewhat hypocritical because that's kind of what BRICS is seeking to do, to be that, I guess, divisive notion, although he might not see it like that. And to revive the Cold War. The UN Security Council is gradually losing its credibility. Correct. The fragility stems in particular from the actions of its permanent members. I wonder who he's referring to. Who wage unauthorized wars in pursuit. Now, he's pluralized that, so he could be meaning like the US, but the US has always sought UN Security Council acceptance for anything they've got involved in, as far as I remember. So, but maybe he's just being like polite about saying just generically wars. But who wage unauthorized wars in pursuit of territorial expansion. So what the US hasn't done previously, say with Iraq and whatnot, that's not been about territorial expansion. So actually, this can only be about Russia invading Ukraine. Like De Silva's come out and laid this one pretty obviously at the table of Russia. So I'm going to start this again. This fragility stems in particular from the actions of its permanent members who wage unauthorized wars in pursuit of territorial expansion or regime change. Its paralysis is the most eloquent proof of the need and urgency to reform it and make it more representative and effective. I think this statement is really strong, and it goes to the nub of one of the issues concerning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that is that obviously, as mentioned, Russia sits permanently on the Security Council and renders the Security Council basically ineffective. He is going to the heart of that matter by saying, one, it's an unauthorized war. In other words, that's a synonym for it's illegal, and the inference is that he condemns it. And two, there needs to be reform to the Security Council. That's music to a lot of people's ears. Now, what he goes on to say is pretty fascinating, and there will be many of you watching this who will be completely at odds with where he goes with this, because actually he then sees BRICS as being a really important corrective to the deregulated free marketism, if that's a word, of the kind of IMF, World Bank, US kind of hegemony. So he's saying that actually BRICS can provide a multilateral trading system that is fairer. For example, he says the IMF, World Bank gave $160 billion, the IMF, to European countries and only $34 billion to African countries. So he's saying that, look, this isn't fair. According to Lula, the article says the BRICS, a bloc of emerging economies to which Brazil belongs, was born in the wake of this paralysis and represents a strategic platform to promote cooperation among these countries. Quote, the recent expansion of the group at the Johannesburg summit strengthens the struggle for an order that takes into account the economic, geographical and political plurality of the 21st century. Now, I'm going to criticize him a bit here because that sounds idealistic and perhaps true in a purist idealistic form, but when you look at the nations that have joined BRICS as the expansion, it's like, what was it, Saudi Arabia, UAE, is it Iran, a number of countries where it's like human rights are not there, so it's not really about equality, where the gap between the rich and poor is huge, and places like Iran are just wholly dubious theocracies, and the core of the expansion at the core of the expansion is hydrocarbons and oil. So he goes on to then talk about the importance of battling climate change. But then, when the people who have joined BRICS are basically the antithesis of that, there's a problem there. So I think maybe there's quite a lot of issue to take with his approach. I mean, I'm no fan of neoliberalism, right, as an economic position. And I think he's correct in critiquing that. But to critique that and get into bed with Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran and whatnot is just, it doesn't really float. but so it's a case of, yeah, okay, there's a whole load of issues you're bringing to the table here, but let's just have a look at this one issue, which is an overt and public criticism of Russia and the war that they have waged illegally in Ukraine. And to that, he's saying some pretty powerful stuff. And really interested to see where this goes, what the fallout is, if indeed there is any. Let me know what you think. So there's stuff to critique maybe in what he says elsewhere, stuff to maybe go, yeah, I think that is a serious problem that the world needs to look at. But when it comes to this, I think he's nailed it, and this is coming from a member of BRICS. So, interesting. So the next thing I want to talk about is just a corrective, well, not quite corrective to what I said in one of my videos this morning, but just I want to clarify, maybe say it better. I was saying that the UK has taken its foot off the gas in terms of giving aid to Ukraine in recent months compared to where it was at the beginning. I talked about how one of my sources asked on Twitter, well, who else other than the obvious ones of the US, Poland, and the UK have been great friends of Ukraine. The inference being, or the implication, being that, who else has given as much as these countries? And I was saying that actually, I don't think UK is among the top echelon of nations at the moment. I think Germany has overtaken us as giving really big consignments of equipment, military equipment. Now, what I wasn't saying is that the UK have done nothing. The UK were brilliant. What's happened, though, is that Ben Wallace, who was really kind of, I think, a really prominent figure in international diplomacy with Ukraine and other players, and was bullish in terms of getting Ukraine assistance from UK budgets and from UK stocks. He handed his resignation in and had that period before he left where he kind of really wasn't doing a lot. And then Grant Shapps took over, and Grant Shapps is not very good in my books, and quite a lot of people. So I've yet to find anyone that actually rates him. And so what we've seen is the UK slipping down the kind of ladder of those who are really supporting Ukraine, and other nations like Germany, taking the reins. But it's not to minimize what we have done, and it's also not to minimize what we are still doing, like the continued efforts we're putting into training are really good. I've been reporting that, how our Marines have been training and commanders have been training the Ukrainian counterparts really, I believe, effectively. Anyway, so Lee Thompson here says, you are totally incorrect when it comes to aid and support as far as Great Britain goes. Wow, I'm Godsmack, Jonathan. Please do a little research. Speak to someone serving in our armed forces. Not every penny is announced that is being given or spent. I think you'd also be very surprised if you're aware of what the French are doing to aid Ukraine. I've tried before, and unfortunately you'll probably not find out until after the war how much Great Britain has done. Let me tell you, Great Britain was doing a hell of a lot more before any NATO partner or EU members got involved. Broadly speaking, I don't deny that, and that wasn't my point. My point was very clear. Well, I'm clarifying it, so obviously it wasn't clear enough. But my point was to say, we've taken our foot off the gas lately, and I think that's indisputable. When today, massive aid packages are going out, and we're like tens of thousands of shells. Now, I know we're doing other things, but Grant Shapps is a shadow of what Ben Wallace was back towards the beginning of the war, and towards the end of his tenure, Ben Wallace was a shadow of what he was, and I tried to explain that in my reply there. So, I just want to. I'm not demeaning what the UK has done, but I do think that we could do with a little bit of a revitalization in where we're going with our support. But it's a really good point that actually not all nations, declare very openly what they're doing to support Ukraine. France, I think, might be a case here with not announcing stuff that goes to Ukraine, and then suddenly you see a bunch of stuff. You're like, oh, I think that might be French. That might come from France. They do have a massive, second biggest arms export industry in the world. So really, France should be a major player. Now, when we hear today that they may be providing Mirages, then okay, that could be why you've been a bit quiet. So, maybe we shouldn't jump to conclusions and criticisms. And the UK is no doubt doing things behind the scenes. It was just that, have we slipped back a little? This Tom Fernby here saying Germany and England like cats and dogs. I've lived in both for many years to notice the differences. Although these days Germany does get slated for the railway services, I find they're just far more efficient and organised. So initially, the war caught them off guard, and they had to prepare and make a plan that they could about what they could do to help. The UK took a different approach. They made no plans and just sent a bunch of stuff. Okay, so the difference can be seen now. We sent what we could spare, great. Then we realised it would take 3 years to make some more, and that's broadly true. So the UK has kind of not got a lot of stuff in the locker, gave most of it, and now we're like, well, we've got the money, so we can splash the cash, so we can buy it off other nations, but we don't really have it ourselves. We sent what we could spare, great, and then we realised it would take 3 years to make more. Germany initially made hasty plans to get long-term aid, like increasing shell and ammo production, and were not prepared to make big donations. But now that Germany had prepared to help, with them being efficient and organised, the aid should flow in regular intervals. UK will be like, yeah, give us 2 more years to restock. I think, well, some other people are not quite so positive there, but surprising knowing some of the commenters. I think that Germany have really stepped up. I think there's been a bit of a shake-up and a bit of a dislocation in the SPD with a dislocation from Russian influences and a realization that, people like Gerhard Schröder, former chancellor, has strong ties to Russia, and that's a little bit uncomfortable. So I think they had to do some housekeeping to get things in order before really, stepping up to the plate. Anyway, just a little bit of a ramble to try and clear a few bits and pieces up there. Okay, so just a couple of really quick things. I'm going to go through a Chris Wiki thread, but I just saw this. The old Maxim machine guns? Well, this is a dual Maxim. Well, you think that's good? Well, now we've got a triple Maxim. I mean, goodness me, looks like quite a bit of kit. Hey, old bits of kit can still be pretty useful. Anyway, mobilized Russians say that their commanders ordered them into an assault despite their injuries and then abandoned them under heavy Ukrainian fire. After refusing, they were imprisoned by their own side in a notorious torture facility in northeastern Ukraine. Astra reports the account of Yevgeny P. as told to his wife Yevgenia on the 18th of September. He says that while fighting with the 27th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade near Bakhmut in May, he suffered a shrapnel wound and was sent to hospital. However, he was not treated. Instead, he was sent with other injured men to Narofominsk in the Moscow region and confined to barracks for a week. He says that a military doctor declared them all fit to fight despite their unhealed wounds. The men were sent back to Ukraine under a new commander. Right, this just, again, if true, talks to the pressure that's on pretty much everyone to get numbers into Russia, back into Russia. There's going to be people sent to doctors. We desperately need soldiers. So if anyone's even vaguely fit enough, you've got to give them the green light. They've got to get back to the front line. They were, quote, taken in the direction of Svatova in eastern Ukraine and abandoned in the forest with no means of subsistence. Many Russian soldiers have reported similar stories of being dumped in the forest without food or water and surviving on berries and puddles. My goodness. When the unit came under fire, the commander, senior company officers, and everyone who was in charge there just ran away like rats, leaving the guys alone to die under shelling, is the quote. Not surprisingly, the injured men refused orders to go into assault. Yevgeny says they were rounded up and taken to Zaitseve, where hundreds of soldiers are reported to have been imprisoned, starved, and tortured to remotivate them. Nothing like that to remotivate someone. Yevgeny's wife, Evgenia, says that she and her relatives, quote, called all the hotlines, reached the head of the unit, but our requests for prayers for the salvation of the guys are simply ignored, citing the fact that they say there is a war, etc. This is just madness and absurdity. The wounded boys were thrown out there just like cannon fodder. Yet another example of the way Russia does things on the front lines, really, and even in hospitals back in Russia. Right, this is doing the rounds at the moment. This is absolutely fabulous, right? So Zelensky's making a speech to UN, gets interrupted by I believe it's an interruption by your Russian speaker here, who says the following. Make sure I've got this loud enough for you. Says this.
I do not object to the participation of the Ukrainian president in this meeting, but this needs to be done in line with the rules of procedure and existing practice, according to which countries invited under Rule 37 speak after the members of the Security Council.
The solution.
This is absolutely brilliant. So he says basically you can't speak until after we've all spoken, and then the Albanian president chimes in with just an absolute slam dunk. So this is fabulous. I'm going to play a little bit of a fuller version of it here.
But as far as you repeated many times that the violation here is about President Zelensky speaking before the Council members, there is a solution for this if you agree. You stop the war and President Zelensky will not take the floor.
Just brilliant. I've got a solution for this, Russia. I'll tell you what. You stop your illegal war in Ukraine, and old Zelensky over there, he won't speak. It'll step down. It's not a problem. You stop your war. Yeah? You're not going to? Shut up, mate. Well done, Albania. We've seen some great stuff from Guatemala, Albania. It's brilliant. Love it. Okay. Hopefully, it was a bit of a cobbled mess, but hopefully that was in some way instructive, informative, useful. I really appreciate all of your support. As I always say, going to give a special thanks to a few today. I know I've already said it, but a massive thanks to Donald Huricik and Data Driven Applications as well. Thank you for your generosity. And Mark Bijq, as ever, legend. Really appreciate Mark and Olena's support. Wonderful. Hopefully might get them. I've been talking with members in the back channels about doing a panel. I might do it for my birthday coming up soon. A panel to get people who have got connections to Ukraine together on a live stream, maybe 3 or 4, 5, 6 people to have a chat about experiences with regard to Ukraine, about the war, anecdotes, just to give a sense of community here and something interesting for people to watch. If you have connections to Ukraine, or you've been to Ukraine, or you're volunteering out there, or you are Ukrainian, please contact me if you have something to say that you think will be useful, and maybe you can get on to a panel discussion here. Anyway, take care everybody, and thanks for all of your support.